We are good to go.
Hi, everyone. Can you read it? Welcome to the 2021 budget workshop. We are excited to present to you our budget, and these are the proposals. We're going to start off with Mayor, and she's going to kick it off. So let me share the presentation, and we will go from there.
Emily, you're on mute. All right, it's not like this is the first time I've done Zoom or anything. Sorry about that. We have a tremendous management team. You will hear Tim Berry remark on this year's budget process and product led by Tammy Havard. She has brought new vision and expertise to our town governance, and it is reflected in this process. Even during a pandemic with revenue declines, she has targeted our resources toward high impact opportunities so that our constituents will not feel the impact of COVID on their public services, but will instead see new amenities and an ongoing excellent level of public service. Each top department will provide an overview of their budget priorities and highlights and how it supports our service to our residents, visitors, and business owners. We are happy to present this information to you in this workshop format in order to get your input prior to finalizing our 2021 budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. This is Tim Berry with Crow, and in prior years, you would have seen a larger role from Crow in the budget presentation. But with the hiring of Tammy and bringing her on, we have shifted our role to more of an advisory role this year, working with Tammy to provide background information on how budgets were prepared and revenue streams from prior years, and then working with her to advise on how to move things forward during the 2021 budget presentation. Some of what makes Zionsville unique, and you may realize this already in your budget presentation, is that you do have several different taxing zones and different assessed values that make up some of those different budgets, which makes it a little unique for Zionsville. And we have worked with Tammy, and she has some great graphical description to provide this distinction for you as well. What is also making some of this a bit challenging is some delays in receiving revenue estimates from the state of Indiana. It was expected that by yesterday, we would have estimated local income tax estimates from the state of Indiana. Those have still not been posted yet. So as a result, some of that data will be delayed until your formal presentation at the council next week. We certainly would hope to receive that information from the state soon. As I'm sure you're aware, when the governor delayed the due date for income taxes for the state of Indiana from April 15th to the July 15th due date, and they extended that time frame from when they would calculate your lit dollars for 2021, that has put a difficult time crunch on the state to actually calculate those dollars and allocate those. So we would anticipate that we would be receiving those here shortly. And with that, we are available for questions throughout, but Tammy is more than capable to lead the presentation as she has prepared the budget that is going to be presented to you. And Tammy, I believe you're on mute as well.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Tim, for that introduction. I wanted to give a quick update on the budget timeline. So we are here on September 16th, and this is the budget workshop. And you can see that we have a budget introduction on Monday, the 21st. We're going to advertise the budget on the 25th. We have the budget public hearing on the 5th of October. And then we will have the budget adoption consideration on the 19th. So you can see we have over a month to discuss the budget. So we would like to hear from council members or anyone else that has comments on it during this budget process. You can email me directly, and we will be able to address any of your questions or concerns and be able to give you a budget that you guys can be proud of. So I want this budget presentation to be informal in that I want you to feel comfortable asking questions of myself and the functional area managers, and so that we can make sure that you understand the budget and the process and the items inside of the budget.
Tammy, so to that point, or a quick question, I guess, if you think about this timeline and know that we have 4 new counselors, 3 on this call that haven't gone through this process. Typically, if you think about an ordinance introduction on a first reading and a second reading, there's no real changes that can happen without sort of starting over the process. In this process, either Tim or Tammy, if the budget is introduced on the 21st and counselors have questions or their own priorities that they'd like to see in the budget, does this process allow for that type of dialogue and interaction and changes that may happen and through the point of the adoption consideration? Is that a fair statement, or where does it sort of get locked into place where you can't make changes or we can't make changes?
Sure, I can address that. So this is the budget workshop. This is a planning session. We are in this budget presentation, we are talking about the revenues from taxes and only those at this point. There are a lot of other funds and different structures, and we want to be able to focus the time so that you guys understand this one during this statutory deadline. We have until November 1st to adopt these state budgets through the gateway system. And then we'll have an opportunity at a later date, either December or January, that you guys will be able to look at other budgets of the other funds that are not tax supported. So we're talking property taxes, food and beverage, and those kind of funds at this point, because they are so unique and they have a lot that you can learn. And we want to make sure that we give enough time to have everybody understand these funds at this point. So the budget workshop between now and the introduction is absolutely the time to contact us and ask questions. And if you want to get items added, that's why we gave ourselves some room on this 9/25, the budget publication. What we advertise on this date, we cannot go over these amounts. So we're going to set an amount per fund as the max amount that you will see in the 1/1/2020 budget. And then we will also put in there and advertise a maximum levy, which will be inflated because, again, as Tim shared, we don't have those net assessed values which determine that tax rate. So those will be inflated high. And once the state receives all the budget information and reviews it, all the values are certified, then that will come back and they will tell us what that levy amount is. And then the tax rate goes along with that levy conversation. So you will see higher than what we actually expect on tax rates, but those will drop down as we get that information certified and as the state comes in. So that 9/25 date is really the state date for when we publish, because we have to publish at least 10 days before that budget public hearing. And so, as you were saying, in Zionsville, there's a first reading, and then we're having the public hearing and adoption consideration. So we would like that budget introduction to be as close to the final product as possible. And so we are going to propose items in this budget, and you'll see the highlights today. And those items are going to be included in the budget introduction unless you tell us between now and Monday that they're not. And then you have the opportunity through this budget process to adopt less than what we are advertising. So that is an option throughout this whole process. In addition, on that adopted publication, we will put in a 5%, as Crow has done in the past, a 5% increase in the budget line items. And so we have a little bit of flexibility, and that will be in the budget introduction as well, so that you guys, again, will have the option to, if there is something that, you know, we need to go back through. I've only been here a few months, so I want to make sure that I have everything in the budget. So we are continuing, my staff and myself, to go through all the line items and make sure we're capturing all of the expenses that normally come through our office. And so those will be in there. And then at the budget adoption consideration on October 19th, you would have the opportunity to then reduce certain line items if we had, you know, identified that there was not anything towards those items. Does that help a little bit?
It does. I mean, I know, you know, we've got new counselors, new mayor, new CFO, a lot of changes here. I think we're past that point now, and I want to be realistic, but I would like to see next year at least more time between a workshop and an introduction, because it really doesn't give council, all of whom this is a part-time / basically volunteer job, much time to digest a lot of information, right, and determine, you know, what is reasonable, what's unreasonable, what are priorities we may have, and what, for lack of a better term, negotiations need to be done between what the mayor wants, what council wants, to an ultimate budget. So I realize there are sort of mitigating circumstances. In any other year, this would seem like it's kind of being rammed through at the last minute. And so that's my ask, I think, for at least next year, given, you know, the ship has sailed here, but that there's more time for council to digest, weigh in, and have discussions with the administration on this instead of 5 days.
Sure. And also, our budgets are capped in a way because of the maximum levies that are imposed by the state. So we cannot grow our property tax revenue by greater than 4.2% for this from 2020 to 2021. And so there's only so much cash balance as well. So the overall numbers that we will be presenting are, you know, are fairly close to probably what we can actually fund. And then within those, you can still change the allocations. And as you know from the budget process, during the next year, there are also opportunities to do transfers from categories and things like that, additional appropriations and other opportunities beyond just this budget cycle.
So I guess a question, and I might have missed this, is there an opportunity at this later point to set more time between the budget workshop and budget introduction? Is there an opportunity to expand that date at all at this point? Or is the downstream considerations for these dates and a kind of a restriction on what can be done in that regard?
Right now, we did it based off of the council schedule that is existing. I believe you can set a special council meeting. And so this, if we push this 10/19 date, again, we just have to adopt before November 1st. And so if we moved this timeline, instead of 10/19, say we do it the following week, then we can work within this to have the budget public hearing and budget adoption consideration, for example, on the same day, as long as we're not violating any of the statutory rules.
President Garrett, I would suggest that we consider that to give ourselves a little more time to look over this. I do have one other, so I don't know what's involved in pushing that forward, but that would be something, 5 days for the council to look over this and to negotiate aspects of it. It just doesn't, when 2 of those days are over a weekend, it just doesn't seem like a good amount of time to get this process done before the introduction.
So yes, I'm definitely open to revising the timeline. So we can have Amy get with all of the council members and find out when they're available for dates. And then we can go from there. I'm not sure on if you still want to have some sort of a budget presentation on Monday. And maybe it's just not the formal budget introduction, but budget workshop part 2. And we can provide you more information. Hopefully we'll get some of those certified numbers that were due to us August 1st and September 15th before then. And so we'll be able to present a more accurate revenue side as well as the expense side so that you can do a full side-by-side comparison on where we were last year at budget time compared to this year, if that would be helpful, because there is a lot to cover. I'm going to cover some of the structural changes, but when the departments are talking about their budgets during this presentation, they're going to talk overall across multiple funds, because that's what they're saying is what they need in order to provide the level of service to the constituents. And so there are multiple components. And so I have some of them earmarked for this presentation. And again, some different aspects, including the revenue, some side-by-side comparisons earmarked for the budget introduction. But I think it is important for me to be able to walk you through all that information, especially with the new members, and be able to take that time in order to go through that.
Why don't we see what we can get through, Tammy, and then we can make a decision afterwards. I mean, I have no problem presenting in the council meeting if it's warranted. I have no problem setting a special meeting if we need to accommodate timelines. I know the state dictates some of this. I want to make sure we all get through this and are dictated to by the state.
Perfect.
This is Alex Choi again. One question, Tammy. You talked about the possibility of decreasing line items.
Yes. And that has been done in the past.
And what about as you decrease one line item, increasing a different line item? Is that done as well?
Yes, that is able to be done.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So some of the budget assumptions for all of the funds, we do have a 3% performance salary pool, which is approximately $350,000 with benefits, as well as a 20% increase in health insurances and a 20% increase in property casualty insurance. So those will not be called out in the specific budgets, but know that those are included in the overall proposed budget numbers. So the functional areas of the town, so these are areas where we serve the community. In the past, administration had included finance and records, direct public assistance, court, information technology, council, mayor, human resources, communications, planning, and economic development. All of those were bundled under administration. So for the 2021 budget, we are going to break those areas out so it's easier to report on a department by department level. In the instances of the past, for instance, a travel training line was shared between those departments. And so in 2021, those areas will then have more accountability to be able to track a budget versus actual for different line items, breaking out the salaries and things like that in each of the departments. So from a transparency standpoint, we're hoping that will help on the public side be able to understand more where their dollars are going when they see that budget broken out in those levels. So I'm going to go through several of these budgets and then I'm going to turn it over to to the different areas, and then they will present on their sections, and then we'll circle back around and talk about some of those structural changes and just budget process in general and go from there. So administration, and I'm not going to read those slides, but these will be posted after the meeting. And so you'll be able to take a look and understand what that proposed budget includes. And each of the areas has some highlights. So this might be a new program or a program that we are asking for additional funding for in order to cover. So that would be an increase. And so that when you look at the side-by-side comparisons at the next meeting, then those increases will make up some of those differences, knowing that we have broken out departments and things like that. So in administration, we have increased legal fees. I know several of the council members have been asking about that. And so we have been watching that on the budget to actual for 2020. And we are planning on using existing appropriations to cover any excess. In 2021, we want to make sure that we cover all the legal expenses that are coming at us, and that we have discussions about those legal fees. So that might be another conversation outside of this call to be able to address any concerns that you have on that line. We
Tammy,
also have,
real quick, I'm
yes?
sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an increase of $366,000
Correct.
or increase to $366,000?
Increase of.
Wow.
So that 516 would be new dollars.
So we're doubling the legal fee budget.
Yes. Yes.
Does that include council legal fees, or is
It
that
does.
just administration?
It does.
fees? Got
So
it.
yeah, it has the
But council has its own budget, so why wouldn't that be in the council legal budget?
And again, that's something structural we can move around between
Got
now
it.
and then. Yep.
Got
But we
it.
want to make sure that we have that conversation.
Yeah, because it'd be helpful to know what of that is council legal fees that may need increase versus what is administration's ask for legal fees as well.
Correct. Yep. And then contractual services for process re-engineering. So basically, as the town offers more services and increases its level of service, we want to make sure that we are doing the best that we can for in all of the areas and serving the constituents to the best of our ability. And so that would be services for consulting and other things that would allow us to increase our level of service. Finance and records, again, there was a shared training line. There's programs out there that will help develop staff. And so we want to be able, again, to have our staff be at a level and be able to serve internally and externally the public. So there's some training dollars in this budget that were not previously in the 2020. Direct public assistance. So there is a staff member in the finance and records that part of her time is spent on direct public assistance. This $84,000 is the direct amount, not including her salary for that. And we did update this to move $10,000 from the utility line to the rent assistance line. And that's just based on actual and trends that we're seeing. Just for council information right now, due to COVID, our rent line is over, and it's mid-September. And so we do have capability in the utility line right now capacity. So we would be using some of that utility money to cover some of the rent. But and again, we can talk about specifics after we get through the presentation, but I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Amy, just real quick, is that not a flat proposal then? So there's nothing new?
It's a flat, yeah. So if you don't see a dollar amount, then it's flat. Mm-hmm. So we're just reallocating in this instance. Town court. So again, no dollar amount under the highlights, but same caveat that the indirect costs are included in finance, and we also have police serve during some of those court hearings, and so those costs are included in finance and police and are not associated with that proposed budget total.
Tammy, can I assume, sort of dovetailing off the last question, that if there's no increase noted, if there's no notation, there's no decrease noted, it's just flat?
Right, we were concentrating on the highlights, new programs and things like that, not necessarily going through and presenting each line that was reallocated, but just on the major highlights.
So in theory, the court budget this year was 9,800 and
Yes,
next year is
absolutely.
proposed 900. Okay, great, thanks.
Information technology. So this one, we are, since starting at the town of Zionsville, and the reason why some of the information has been so late is because we are taking PDF reports or, you know, other reports and trying to aggregate this information and do side-by-side comparisons with some of the breaking out the departments and things like that. We want to make sure that we can get you timely information. And so we have in the budget proposal a new ERP, new financial system, reporting, permitting system. Again, due to COVID, there are a lot of things that we cannot do easily remotely. And so having a new system would help that tremendously and allow us to be able to work better. And social distancing, one of the ERP solutions that we're looking at is in the cloud. So no nightly backups or, you know, taking 2 hours to re-index every morning. That would be a huge help to my department, again, working with the fiscal body, the council, in order to provide information. Reporting is very important, and so we want to be able to give you guys timely budget to actual information. And so with a new ERP system, we hope to be able to do that, to have you guys have a login and you can just see that information at your fingertips. Rave Mobile Safety. Yep, go ahead.
What does ERP stand for? And just looking ahead, what does RAVE stand for?
Sure. ERP is the enterprise resource planning system. And so we can expand it to include inventory, online payment, vendor portal. Like it's more than just a financial system. It tracks other things as well. And we would import the payroll data into it. So basically it's this hub for all of the technology to run through for the town. And then Rave Mobile Safety is a text notification and service that people will be able to sign up for. That is a new initiative that that Communications is administrating, and so you will hear more about that in hopefully maybe later this year. And so we have a subscription, again, something new and exciting, and that will help the residents going forward. And then with IT, there's capital costs that we need to update our systems. And so a server upgrade is in there for $97,000. And then council, you guys have not seen this yet, but we did go through and do a comparison of communities, surrounding communities, that showed that Zionsville at the current rate of 5,000 was way below the surrounding communities. So in this presentation, we do have a $10,000 per council member in the budget. Again, this is a proposal, and you are able to reduce it below this amount, but we wanted to put something in there in order to allow you to see and to make a decision, an informed decision on what that rate should be. And with the surrounding communities, the stipends for, there's only one other community with a stipend for president, and it's 1,000, but all the other communities do not have stipends. So again, those are decisions that you can make and that you can discuss, and then we can get it either revised or included in the 2021 budget proposal.
Is the stipend, I know that council president makes 10 grand and the other councilors make 5 grand. Is the difference the stipend you're talking about, or is there something else there involved?
So it includes so instead of $5,000 times the 7 members, there's a net increase of $30,000 to the current budget, because the 5,000 times 5 or times 6 basically is the 30. If we remove the 5,000, current stipend for the president.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yep.
I didn't realize that was a stipend.
Yep, it is. And so I'm going to now turn it over to the different areas, and then they can talk to you about some of the highlights in their budget, and then you can ask any questions at that time, and then know that information is forthcoming as far as the breakdown of the departments. One example is police and fire. You will see in police department, for example, there is a total amount of what they need in order to run their operations. And in that amount, we allocate a certain portion towards public safety lit. And so for the purposes of today, I want you to focus just on what they are doing across all of the funds and how that then supports the town. So in the introduction or the next meeting, we will present the portion of it that is from lit, but for the purposes of what we are doing to support the town, this is the dollar amount for that functional area in order to support those areas. So I will turn it over to the mayor next.
She may be on mute.
I know, I did that again. Again, I'm so grateful for the professionals who are dedicated to our town that work here at the town. This budget reflects an investment in them as well, in their health and well-being, in supporting and expanding their professional skills, and in health and safety initiatives. We are proposing a 3% performance salary pool for employees, and that increase for town council to achieve parity for neighboring jurisdictions. Furthermore, we are investing in training and employee team building efforts to show our appreciation and support for their good work for our community. That's really what my budget includes, is that that focus on building our team and supporting our workforce. And I appreciate your support too, that you've demonstrated many times for this amazing group of public servants.
Emily, just real quick, you mentioned a 3% salary pool. That's not part of this 25K, right? That would be a different line item.
No, that's really just more general in terms of when we're talking about supporting the
Yeah.
But yes, this portion is really more towards that those training events, team building, and just other employee highlights.
Yeah, thank you.
So next we'll go over to human resources.
Hi, most of you I have not met other than Brad. My name is Jo Keel. I joined the team in June of this year, so this is my first budget with the town. I've worked in financial services for about 25 years, banks and credit unions, and my focus has always been on either sales or HR, which doesn't really mesh together, but that's my background. So we are a team of two in HR. I took Angie Eggers, who you may know, and snatched her about day 3 from finance, and about 90% of the work that she was doing was human resources related. But we are taking over some processes from police and fire, professionalizing human resources from what you might think as personnel, largely administrative, to really more of a strategic partnership with the managers, providing mentoring to them, developing growth and development plans, and really reducing the risk to the town through litigation and turnover and that type of thing. So we are asking for a part-time employee to help with that effort, and that part-time kind of generalist will be working with primarily that administrative stuff. We're also wanting to propose an intern program. The dollars included would be 3 interns at any one time. And nearly every area of the town has responded with opportunities. And these could be high school interns, they could be college interns, they could be summer interns. So lots of flexibility with just plugging in that dollar amount. And we're excited and we'll communicate more about that program as it begins being developed. There are 2 operating budgets that we're wanting to add. One is a compensation plan. The current compensation structure is there is no real minimum, midpoint, maximums to any kind of job here. It's the there's no point of view or philosophy about how we want to compensate people and how we hire and retain top performers. What we want to do is do a complete market analysis, create a base pay structure. We will come back in probably second quarter with recommendations if there are gaps in how we're going to get there. This also includes performance evaluations, improving that format to make sure when we have situations, we're able to communicate those effectively and legally to our staff. So lots of information with the compensation. The other one is our payroll system. We do not have what I would consider an HRIS for those of you in other areas. We have basically payroll. And so almost every process is manual. We do not have, it does not integrate between our benefit platform. It's not integrated to communicate with police and fire. Lots of these things can be automated with a good system, and the cost benefit can be pretty dramatic. So we're asking for that, and I'm doing comparisons of systems right now. That's all I had to share today, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Joe, I've not seen a problem with turnover in the town or relative to our peer towns. So it leads me to believe that compensation is probably pretty adequate. Any reason why we're spending 55 grand to go review compensation? I'd be more concerned if we were losing employees left and right.
Sure, we have somewhat of a turnover problem in the fire department. We also, the core problem really is we don't have a basis for what we're using for compensation. It is, you know, we ask for X percentage every year to update that. And there's no system that ensures internal equity between departments and between positions, and external equity between the different communities that we consider competition for good employees. So I'm along with that, I'm about halfway done with turnover. We're getting turnover stats for the town and for each department to be able to track that going forward.
Hey, Joe, Brad, just real quick. He says with benefits, and then you got I love the intern program concept. You got a part-time employee at 30K. That includes benefits with that person? That seems.
No, this particular, honestly, I don't know what
I can answer that.
Please do, because this particular, the part-timer would not have benefits, health insurance and that type of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Nor would the interns.
If you look, the 45K plus the 30K does not add up to the 80K. Yeah. So the additional is FICA and Medicare. So
thank you,
with the benefits, so the town pays the FICA and Medicare. So we do have that taken into a consideration for the proposed, even though they are not getting health and dental and those kind of benefits, they do receive FICA. And so we want to make sure that we account for everything and that we have the total cost included in the proposed budget.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Tammy.
So we will go on to the next budget, which is communications.
Good morning, this is Amanda. I know all of you, so I won't do a long introduction. I am a department of one. I do partner with others in the community to help produce some of my materials. So that covers some of my budget. You'll see one of the first items is marketing materials. So that is local media partnerships. You may have seen our partnership this year with The Current. We produce a publication called Currently Zionsville every month. So that will involve the cost of that partnership plus any professional photography that we use within that. Advertisements to be able to advertise in the future in local publications such as Indianapolis Monthly, and again to have that media partnership. Signage, any additional signage we put around town, that could be along our roads and in our streets or within our parks, to promote, you know, a dog park coming or a new playground coming. So we have lots of neat new signage around town. Any letters, so this could involve direct mail letters to residents and the cost to send postcards or letters. Graphic design, this would be a partnership with a local graphic designer to help really share some of our key initiatives that are going on and produce the graphics for that. It could involve charts, it could involve really just neat signs and materials. It could also involve mapping to be able to really professionalize what we put out there to the public. And another highlight is professional photography and videography. So we continue to partner with local photographers and freelancers and also videographers to share photos of the town in our different publications, on our website, on social media, just through all our different marketing channels to share what's going on and all the neat things that we're doing in a really professional way. Some other items that aren't on there but that are worth sharing are subscriptions. So we have subscriptions to SurveyMonkey. We've increased the number of surveys that we've put out there this year so we can really involve residents and stakeholders in what we're doing and get community input. Constant Contact is something we've been using for a long time. That's our platform for e-newsletters. The Parks Department partners on that, as well as town administration. And just other web-based platforms that we can use outside of our website to promote high-level initiatives that will take on different web digital presences. And then social media paid advertising, that's something I wanted to do for a very long time, to be able to, a lot of our stakeholders, our audiences are on social media. That's where they get their news. So to be able to boost certain posts, most every business that's on social media does some sort of advertising to reach audiences. So to be able to have a line item for that would be really beneficial. And then promotional items. So to have booth presence at various events. That could be my department, that could be other departments that I would help with their presence, the cost of having a booth, but also the setup of that booth.
Amanda, this might be an unfair question, and it's not meant to be because everything was kind of lumped together previously. What I feel is missing for me is context, and this is not specific communication, but you know, what was communications budget or spend last year, and to see the difference. Like, was it 200,000 last year and it's 203,000 this year, or was it 80,000 last year, now it's $200,000, and then, you know, relative to the operating highlights the same thing. In other words, you know, in 2020, did we spend $8,000 on professional photography and videography partnerships, or is that new money? And if we are, then what are we not spending money on? I'm just curious, kind of, you don't have to answer all that right now, but I'm just kind of curious at level of detail, or counselors may be curious at level of detail to understand what is changing, what is increasing, what is decreasing. You know, I certainly trust you, and really all the department heads to spend the money the way you should be, but it's just good to know that level of detail. And Tammy, maybe that's more a question for you than for Amanda, because it's not specific to communication.
Yes, and I will say the way that the claims were processed before, just through administration, we will have to go through every claim in order to separate out, to find out how much each of them each of the functional areas we're spending out of that budget. So when we're talking about side-by-side comparisons, we are going to be doing this was administration in the 2020 budget, and then these represented these areas, and now in 2021 they are broken out, and this is the area, the overall total from 2020 to 2021. These are the highlights that make up those totals. Without spending time going through every claim that was processed in 2020 or 2019 to get those breakouts. And that's one of the reasons why we did want to break it out into a granular detail for you guys, so that we can get to that level of that you would expect to be able to see out of the town services. And so, long answer, but the short answer is we will have to group it because I do not have enough staff to go through that level of detail at this point when preparing the budget and getting the revenues and all of that together.
Yeah, and I don't want to create a bunch of work. I mean, I realize that next year, I guess maybe that'd be a better expectation as
Yes,
we go through this transition. I think what would be helpful from hearing from department heads is, are there things that we're currently doing that you are now no longer proposing? And it could be because there was no ROI on there. It could be because there was no money on there. It could be because you found, there was a better thing to do. We were, previously doing a bunch of advertising in the Times Sentinel, and now we want to do it in social media because that's more effective. That's where our constituents are, and all that makes sense. It's very hard, I think, right now to just understand what changes are happening. And some of that, I think, is most of that probably is because of the change in system, but any sort of anecdotal information would certainly be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
So next we have planning and economic development. So I will turn it over to Wayne.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this topic. As on the screen, we're focusing on the proposed budget of $2.3 million. Of course, this is a bit different than you've seen before because our budget in the past has always been lumped into administration. So pulling it out, having this conversation for each of these separate departments is certainly a very good thing, but certainly it is something that's different. So certainly you're seeing our personnel costs, the overhead that's associated with that, and certainly focusing on the personnel highlights in order to provide the services that the constituents are expecting and the service levels that the staff wants to maintain. You're looking at some additional staffing that would need to be discussed. We've always projected a new building inspector coming on, an additional building inspector coming on in 2021, the creation of a permitting technician, an economic development manager, and another planner are all associated with the levels of service that we need to provide or are expected to provide to the community. To your question, President Councilor Garrett, regarding, are there things that we are no longer doing? I can't think of one thing we're no longer doing. If anything, it is we're doing more and to a greater intensity. COVID has changed things somewhat, but there's realizations of capacity and functionality that we hadn't tapped. And so we're performing at a different level in a different manner, and certainly achieving new and greater things. With the operational highlights, we have 3 different projects that we're focusing on. I'll speak to the bottom 2 first, the Gateway Study and the Wayfinding Project. Council recalls that last year you set aside monies for this year related to a corridor study. This is a reinvention of that topic, if you will, but with a greater reach and impact, and certainly conversations with the constituency. The Gateway Project is currently underway. We look to have a public event here the first week of October. I'm sorry, the last week of September, first week of October there. And certainly the Wayfinding Project is under contract. The other topic you see at the top there is the zoning ordinance rewrite. And this honestly is an effort that we've been needing to undertake for a number of years. Certainly this project would focus on the concept of a form-based code, a different way of managing ourselves rather than the Euclidean style of effort. This topic has been discussed by your Board of Zoning Appeals and your Plan Commission, and we're currently out seeking consultants, and we'll be reviewing those proposals here next month. Pausing here for any questions, but thank you for the time to speak to this topic.
Euclidean, that is a top-notch word there, Wayne. I don't even know what it means, but I'm not going to question it.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think it's a Greek philosopher.
Oh, very good, Brad.
Yeah.
Touche.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you.
Wayne, well, so can you go back for a second? So can you, I had a hard time understanding what or zoning ordinance rewrite was again. Can you put it in more of terms that, I don't know, that I can understand?
No, I'm happy to speak to it. So in 2008, 9, and 10, the town, through its reorganization efforts, combined the urban zoning ordinance with the rural zoning ordinance. So basically taking your Boone County APC zoning ordinance, feathering it into your urban zoning ordinance, then it was just the town of Zionsville zoning ordinance. And you created an ordinance that was over 500, approximately 500 pages in length. And I would say the second most complex zoning ordinance in the state of Indiana, except for Marion County. This is a great opportunity to reinvent the conversation of how we manage ourselves from a zoning point of view. There's a fantastic way to do this in the form of form-based code, which is a tool that regulates a property more in line with the size of that property, not just painting a picture that says if you're fill in the blank zoning district, these are your standards. It's more of a fluid process that allows greater flexibility, and I think would allow residents to achieve greater satisfaction with how the town manages zoning. So this is definitely a conversation, and we're going to be launching into this here next month. Looking at first off the responses from consultants as to what they think we need to do to reinvent the conversation here. Happy to dive into this a little differently, but let me know, Dr. Choi, your thoughts.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess I didn't realize you had 10 staff. Is some of that part-time?
It is not. We have 3 building inspectors. We have a post-compliance project manager. So basically on the back end of any project is going vertical or is turning dirt, we have a pre-development project manager, and that person is managing all the intake of all the petitions related to and getting them past pre-development. You have 1 administrative assistant. We have a zoning compliance planner, and we have an economic development planner, and then we have a BZA petitions planner. Each planner is cross-trained in different staffing circles, and honestly, everybody in the front of the shop, if you will, is cross-trained to counterbalance the many different service lines that we provide to the constituency, which I think has allowed us to stay at a staff of 10. But this, it's time to grow and recognize the additional expectations.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Moving on to police, Chief Spears.
Good morning, everyone. We in the police department are very proud to bring forth a net neutral budget request. We looked closely at our 2020 budget, and we found we had the ability to make a lot of the purchases and add equipment supplies that will see us through not only this year, but into 2021, and make those purchases now so that we can bring forth this flat budget. This year, we're using our budget to buy things like to upgrade our weapons, a speed trailer, which has been very well received throughout town, to maintain our fleet. We've also reduced overtime significantly here in the police department through a variety of methods, including management not allowing the payout of PTO as it had been allowed in the past, and a new schedule program. So we're able to look forward to 2021 and be able to reduce overtime in that fashion. Highlights of our 2021 request include the ability to structure our salaries in a way to have parity with firefighters and that area of public safety. We are able to fund the accreditation process, which is currently underway, comprehensive annual physicals for our police officers, continue the efficient replacement of our fleet so that we don't have exorbitant repair costs, and the acquisition of 10 license plate readers, which we placed at strategic places throughout town. We're proud of the work that our police officers have done, and I'm very proud to bring this request to you and not have an increase in 2021. Any questions?
Chief, I remember during the transition to our new mayor and the transition committee, and there was a recommendation from a third party that we dramatically increase the number of patrol officers that we have. I think it was at least 10 patrol officers. Have you reevaluated that? That was certainly under an old chief and an old system. And do you feel, I was surprised to have a neutral budget, quite candidly, given that recommendation that was made not more than 12 months ago. Are we adequately staffed?
That's a great question, and it's got a somewhat complex answer, I think. The truth is, the way that we were staffed in the past was pretty flat. We had, an even number on each shift throughout the day, middle, and late shift, all the same number. So by restructuring the shifts, we have placed more officers during peak activity hours within the town. So we start out with a smaller number than we once had. As activity in the day increases, we see a spike in personnel, and it drops off as activity drops off. So we are able to handle calls for service, I think, in a more efficient manner than perhaps we did in the past. I fully agree with the idea that we need more officers if it gets to the point where the police department should ever police the rural area. We would definitely need those officers in that fashion. But at this point, I'm very comfortable with the staff that we have and the jurisdiction we're responsible for.
Great. And that comment's not made out of any concern I have necessarily or anything I'm hearing from residents. It was just part of that. My other question, I guess, is more philosophical in nature. When you think about license plate readers, how do you battle the perception of a, pardon the phrase, police state or an Orwellian type state where you're constantly monitoring everyone versus public safety? How would you answer to that kind of concern that I would have about cameras everywhere or people constantly being monitored?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we don't want a big brother state here or anywhere for that matter. These cameras don't automatically take enforcement action. In other words, you don't get a ticket if you run a light or if there's a speed problem. It's not for that purpose. These cameras are placed at strategic areas throughout the town to monitor the ingress and egress of motor vehicles. And they read license plates and let officers know if a vehicle is wanted, if it's stolen, if it's involved in a crime, and it increases the public safety of our town, because we're able to go back and if we have a crime, officers made a nice arrest the other day where they stopped some people who had been passing counterfeit money, and they made that arrest because they were on patrol, had been observant based upon information been provided to them, saw the vehicle and stopped it. If that vehicle had been detected by a license plate reader, we would have gotten an alert that the vehicle was coming to town, and based on the prior information that we had about its occupants and the crimes they'd been committing, we could have focused on the locations that they'd been passing this money. So that's one example of how it can be used. The truth of the matter is these plate readers will be at locations where there's no expectation of privacy. In other words, very public, private areas where anybody with a cell phone camera or camera could take an image of a vehicle coming or going through town. And we're not going to use the cameras to just write tickets or things like that. It's if there's a burglary at a home and they have a description of a red truck, we can run the images and see if we could find that red truck and a plate number that will help us with the investigation. So it's not designed to be intrusive. It's designed to help ensure security, not only for the residents of Zionsville, but for those persons who do business here or work here, or we are guests, visitors, things like that. And they're used extensively throughout the country, and not only large cities, but smaller towns as well.
Keith, how long is that data stored?
I happen to have my LPR expert, Captain Clark, in here with me, so I'm going to see if he can help me with that question.
So that data is stored for a determined amount of time, and I have to go back and check the actual numbers, but I believe it's approximately 30 days, but where you can go back and research. And like Chief was saying, if there was a crime committed and we had that red truck and we have a partial plate or a hit and run accident, we can go back and try to help point investigators in the right direction. We're not using that data to compile it and build a case based on just random information. It's specific information we would be looking for within that to help point the investigators in the right direction.
So in that case, again, let's talk, and I'm sorry to keep focusing on this. We can take this offline if we're running out of time, but let's say a crime is committed and the crime was committed by someone in a red truck, right? You could go back and look. Would you go back and look at all the red trucks that had come into Zionsville at that time or on that date to try to narrow that down?
So that's correct. And you can look for the red trucks, and the camera system is actually extremely good technology where it can look at the tail lights and try to give you a make and a model of a truck. So if we said it's a red Chevy truck, and we don't need to go through every red truck, we can look for a Chevy truck that's red in color and hopefully give us a time frame between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. they were in town. So that's the vehicles that the detectives can start looking at, and they can start narrowing their investigation down. Because it's what it really is for the officers out there and investigators is kind of a force multiplier. Instead of having officers just being out there trying to observe that vehicle, like Chief was saying, it's out there, it's checking those. And again, we're able to do this without adding anything to the budget. So it really does, it helps the officers, it helps investigators. It's really quite great technology. And I can send you more information offline about their capabilities, and their demo was very impressive when we did the demonstration with them.
It kind of relates, Counselor, to your question about staffing, and this is a method that we can use to help, as the word I think Captain uses, a force multiplier. It does allow us to do things that we can't do with the staff that we have. So we think it's a valuable addition to the safety and security of the town.
And does it only look at the vehicle? In other words, let's say a crime is committed and the victim states, and just for an example, it was a black individual, a black male who did it, or a Latino male, and that we then use this and we identify, there was a black male in the community driving down this street at that time, and turns out that person lives here or was visiting here and has nothing to do with this. I would just hate to target people unfairly based on a personal description versus a vehicle description.
No, it doesn't do that. It solely is checking the back of that vehicle there, and
okay.
Looking at the vehicle, it's looking at the taillights, it's looking at the plate number, and that's all that it's documenting. It's not documenting occupants. It'll just document the vehicle and the direction of travel of that vehicle, but nothing else in that is documented there. So again, it's a starting point for investigators. It's a starting point for officers. So if we do have somebody coming in town to commit crime or victimize our citizens, that we'll be able to see, hey, there's a stolen vehicle, northbound on this location, so we can help prevent the crimes from occurring out there.
And Tammy, this question I guess maybe goes back to you. I know that the prior presenters were maybe lumped into administration. Is there a comparison between, well, this is a revenue neutral budget, what the police budget was and what the proposed police budget is, or will that be presented at some point to council to see these are the changes that are happening, Chief Spears and is proposing?
Yes, absolutely. So police is a separate department. It is in over several funds. And so we will present it, probably those two funds together for that department in this instant, because the lit amount may change. And so it wouldn't be an apples to apples comparison of the lit police portion from one year to the next. right? I believe that you would want to, and I want to give you not just data, I want to give you information so that you can make the decisions. So for the police, I would put the police and of the normal funds along with the police lit, or with the public safety lit number. And so that as an aggregate is what you're seeing on this slide. And then you will see the 2020 number. And it is a decrease, a slight decrease when you combine those two from 2020 to 2021. It's less than 1% decrease. So that's why it says net neutral, but you will see the actual numbers the next presentation.
So, and you asked the question I was going to ask, but I'll ask it anyways. Regardless of the funds that are coming in, the proposed budget is fund agnostic because it's the expenses that we're reviewing here, not the revenue sources of them. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. That is the perfect way to look at it.
Great. Thank you. I didn't have any questions. Sorry.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions. I seem monopolizing them, but.
If there's no other questions for police, then we will go on to the fire department. Chief Van Gorder.
Thank you very much, Tammy, and good morning, counselors and everybody. The 2021 fire department budget is focused around maintaining the fire services to both the urban and rural residents as they've come to expect over the past years. Very similar to the police department, the fire department actually remains flat, and if not a slight reduction, once you remove the budget assumptions, which were including the salary pools, the increased healthcare cost, and the workers' compensation. So there are no projected increases in those operating expenses. In the capital highlights, there is a noted increase for the replacement of 2 tanker trucks that would haul water. Those 2 tanker trucks had previously been scheduled to be replaced in 2019 and 20, and for various reasons, that replacement schedule has been pushed back. We have stretched the replacement timeline from 15 years to 20 years. That's the good news. The bad news is as we push back those replacements, the cost for replacing those fire trucks increase. So actually in the 2019 budget, there were $276,000 in the equipment line that was not spent. And then this year there's $105,000. What happens to those funds? Those funds roll over in the fire equipment fund and become available for expenditure next year. And that's why we've kind of put that together with a request to replace both those tanker trucks as we've pushed them as far as they can for a replacement cost of approximately $415,000. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have about the fire department budget, but that's a brief overview.
If you think about capital purchases in the business world, it would be cash out, but would be depreciated over a series of years. Does government work in the same manner, or is that $415,000 effectively treated as a straight line expense, not a capitalized asset that's depreciated?
So it is government, and you are correct. It has different rules. So at this point, there are no depreciation rules for government accounting. The State Board of Accounts is looking to implement a form of depreciation in the future. And that has been put on hold due to COVID, but that will be something that we should see in the future as a requirement. And again, with my staff specifically in dealing with the changes, because there is a higher level of expectation now of government, and we want to be more transparent with things. That's why training and development is so important to be included in these type of budgets so that we can keep up and give a more business-centric view instead of just this is government, this is how we've always done it. We want to do it right, and we want to be able to explain it to an average citizen so that they understand what services are out there, how much it costs, and then what revenue sources support those things.
No, I very much appreciate that approach, Tammy, and I think the public will too. Jamie, if you think about those increase in 2 tankers, is that $415,000 plus the 381 that's rolled over the last 2 years, or inclusive of that 381 that you've been accruing over that time period?
Inclusive.
Yeah, it's a net increase. You would have the 415 plus the 105. So since the 105 was, the 105 was already in the 2020 budget, is not planning on being spent. So the net increase, to your point from the previous conversation, that these are new programs, new dollars. So the 415 is a net increase.
Got
And And the 276 from the 2019 year was unspent funds as well.
Right, but wouldn't be a difference from 20 to 21. So that makes sense. It's just a big cash available to pay for that.
Correct.
Great.
Hey, Chief, this is Brad. We had a conversation early on just about kind of a new program y'all were implementing, and maybe this is already all included in your budget. I just want to make sure it's in there. You had talked about kind of a psychological health initiative that included some mentoring and some dollars for resources and things like that. Are you still moving forward with that, that new concept, and is that fully accounted for?
Yes, it is. We've included some health and wellness initiatives such as a DARI process, is more physically fitness driven. And then there's also some funds allocated in there for new leadership education training for our mid-level and senior level managers to continue to improve those management techniques that are not traditional firefighting, about how you put a house fire out, but how you manage people. So yes, we've included those expenses within the 2021 budget request.
All right.
If there are no other questions, we will move on to Public Works. Lance?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I want to start off by saying that the title of Public Works is not being presumptuous in any way. As Tammy put together this program, that is how she titled it. For the purposes of our discussion, you could really consider this the Streets Department until such time as a determination is made, as we work through answering some of your questions on the Public Works format. But should it be decided that the town doesn't want to move ahead with a Public Works governance system, Public Works would change the streets, but the staffing request and budget request would remain essentially the same, because no matter what you call it, the need for the programs and capacities is still there, and any added personnel would then just be housed within the street department. The proposed budget of $7.7 million is fairly well in line with this year's budget. We have a budget currently in 2020 of about $7.96 million, including encumbrances. We obviously have a wide swing from year to year at times, depending on the projects with which we're involved, which can produce quite a swing, positive or negative. So in the personnel highlights, we've covered these. As you can see below, these are the same staffing, additional staffing requests that were highlighted during the Public Works. And again, if Public Works is not where we go, we still need to bring these capacities on board. And so these would be part of the Streets Department. Capital highlights, we have some up to 20-year-old, 17 to 20-year-old equipment that we're proposing to replace this year. And you can see those delineated there at the bottom of the screen. Some surveying equipment for our added staffing level. And the big monster this year is land for the roundabout of $1.2 million. That is the current estimated land costs to install and construct the new roundabout at 800 East, where there's currently a traffic signal. That was a temporary traffic signal. We are already in design on the roundabout, and the next phase of that project would be to purchase the additional right-of-way for that roundabout. Those are the high-level overviews, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have today.
Lance, is that the land? the land for the roundabout, is that for the purchase of that additional land, or anything to do with improvements to the land?
That is only for the purchase of property and compensations to property owners for damages as a result of purchasing portions of their properties.
Lance, if you think about your budget, 7.7 million, down slightly from 7.9 million, in addition of personnel of $655,000. Where does the personnel get paid from? In other words, are we not paving $655,000 in roads because we're hiring 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, or where does that money come from?
It comes with the revenue that the town receives. There is nothing cut from our current programs, and in fact, We are at a paving level proposed in 2021 that's higher than it's ever been before, which is $2 million across funds. We've been very reserved and cautious in the past on our spending practices. So we have had some funds that have been growing, which have allowed us to accommodate both the staffing increases and not just maintain, but also increase the amount of money we're spending on streets.
I think another component of that, as Lance mentioned, was that it includes, when he was doing his comparison, and this is why the comparisons are not as clean cut, is because he was including encumbrances. So that would be appropriations from 2019 that rolled over into 2020. If you're just looking at the 2020 budget compared to the 2021 budget, there would be an increase in the ask from 2020 to 2021. And so that's where some of the salary and benefits would be an increase over 2020. And so, as Lance mentioned, that the capital costs are a main driver of the Public Works Streets Department, and that it fluctuates from year to year. And depending on what projects are happening in a given year, then it will vary on whether or not the revenues exceed the expenses, or the expenses are going to exceed because there was additional cash balance left over that rolled over from the prior year. So it's, I want to be cautious when we present, and that's why I wanted to have it at a separate discussion from this one, because it is not an easy budget 2020 to budget 2021. Another consideration, and what I want to get council to think about, is what are we actually spending? So instead of comparing the 2019 budget to the 2020 budget, what did we actually spend in 2019? When 2020 is closed, then the 2020 budget is not as relevant as what we actually expended those funds on in 2020. And so that's where a reporting tool and things like that would be able to help in framing some of these conversations, rather than just looking at static numbers and figuring out how much was encumbered and going forward from there. So we are going to try to not include encumbrances where it is not absolutely necessary. So again, some of these budgets may include, if a department is not sure that their expenditure would happen in 2020, if there was a great chance that it would happen in 2021 instead, then the departments were instructed to put that amount in the 2020 amount, so that we did not have to go through the process of doing an encumbrance. In Gateway, the encumbrances do not show up there. So what you approve as an encumbrance, the public would not see that from the state transparency portal. And so we're working towards getting more tools to where it's easily understandable for an average citizen to look at one place and to be able to see the information in order to make a conclusion or to ask a question based on the informed decisions.
Tammy, one thing I'd want at least us to consider, or council to be aware of, is encumbrances can be valuable if we are saving up for something, right? We're saving up for a new fire station, we're saving up for a new north-south connector, whatever that may be. I just want to be cautious that we aren't approving budgets that don't think about encumbrances, so that we don't get in a situation where we can't save for future projects and find ourselves where a project that we might have been able to save for, we now have to bond for, because we've been spending all of our money on additional personnel or things that look like we can afford, when in effect we're just stopped saving to afford them, if that makes sense.
So the encumbrance is if the amount of dollars are not spent in a certain year, then the amount is available in the cash balance to be appropriated in the following year. So it is not if you don't use it, then you lose it. That cash will be there, and we can adjust our operating balance, our cash balance expectations, in order to account for that, so that we still raise enough levy in order to meet those project goals. And so we would not do an encumbrance if we did not have a contract and already have it planned. So there is a little bit of difference of I think how you explained it versus the actual, that if the cash is not spent, then it rolls over to the following year. So in the example of the motor vehicle highway fund, any dollars that are set to be spent in 2020, if they are not spent, you still have that available to be used in the following year. So you do not need to do an encumbrance to hold that amount.
So, and I'm not surprised I explained it wrong. I would trust yours over mine. Let's just say that in a situation that Chief Van Gorder says, in 5 years, we're going to need a new fire station. It's going to cost $5 million. Are those, and we want to save, let's say we decide we want to save $1 million a year to pay for that. Can we do it? I assume we can. How do we represent that within a budget where that is money that is that money that is budgeted that's just sort of accrued even though it's not spent? I'm just trying to balance it where making sure that we have the ability to save if we decide to do it, whether it's a rainy day fund, whether it's for a future capital project, whether it's for something unknown, and how that's represented here.
Sure, and I think the biggest difference is whether or not you want to raise property tax levy for that specific purpose. And if so, then yes, you would include it in the budgeted amount, and then once that budget, and Cindy from my office will go through and explain how some of those forms are filled out and how we get to that property tax levy amount. But yes, there is a mechanism for which we can meet that goal that you just laid out in your example. But encumbrance is not the correct wording for how we do that. So I can explain that better in the next presentation, or once Cindy starts talking about how we go through and fill out these forms. I think that might help answer some of the process questions on getting the result that you just laid out.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Josh, it's a really good question. I mean, as someone who's new, I mean, I don't know that we've ever, quote, strategically saved money unless we knew, and again, I don't know. I mean, so to your point of a large known expenditure that's coming at some point in time, would it be prudent to know that ahead of time? So instead of, I feel like the dollars that we usually have saved from one budget year to the next were really just things that just didn't happen. You know, they weren't necessarily strategically planned. They were just surpluses that ended up being carried over. I don't know if there are examples of us really saving, quote, for a rainy day, or if that would even be wise. I would just welcome any input on that from somebody who's been through this process.
So I'll take that one. So for the 2021 budget, included in the finance dollars, which we already had consulting dollars, it's actually a drop in consulting dollars, but we still included dollars for a sustainability plan. And so that would be looking at a few years of current budgets along with projections for the next few years. As I've been meeting with the departments, we have been working on capital plans. So for the example of IT, when do your switches need to be replaced, right? So is that in 2023? Is that in 2026? So those kind of questions we are working through with the departments, and then we will be able to lay that out in a plan. And looking at those ending cash balances and being able to monitor them for the different funds. You guys mentioned, the council mentioned the rainy day fund. So I do believe that we do need to move money into the rainy day fund. So you will probably see that as a proposal through a resolution this year before the end of the year. And to be able to take advantage of those kind of savings, as well as Trust Indiana interest rates and things like that. So we will be doing that in 2021, and we would welcome your input on the strategic planning process and what the priorities are and forward thinking of the council in that input for the plan.
Awesome, thank you.
So Tammy, when you're talking about a rainy day fund, is this basically an unrestricted town reserve?
Yes, so it's important to have a rainy day fund for if we have a need to go to bond, then the Standard & Poor's, Moody's, the bond rating agencies look closely at, do you have this rainy day fund and what is it funded at. And basically it's if for some reason your revenues are not coming in where they should be, and you still need to provide the services to the town, police, fire, there's so many services that the town provides that cannot go away, then what is your safety net? And so that rainy day fund is the safety net for the town. And we do have cash balances. We are fortunate that there has been savings in the funds. We just need to be able to strategically think about them on what part to use now, what part to save for later, and then when that funding happens. We kind of touched on it a little bit when talking about when people say balanced budget, they normally expect that's when the revenues exceed the expenses in a given year. But again, that can be misleading if you had saved in one year for the following year, especially in regard to capital expenses that you don't always have control over the timeline of when those expenses are spent. So I'm glad you guys are thinking like that, to be able to understand that the plan will lay out the expenses, both the operating, but also the capital, and the capital will fluctuate from year to year. And we need to make sure that we have cash sustained in those years that we need them. And the plan will be able to tell us that.
And then a different question, unrelated to Public Works budget, but more of a global thing. You talked about things rolling over from year to year. Are there funds or allocations that do not roll over from year to year, and as a use it or lose it kind of scenario?
Sure. So government accounting is fund-based accounting. So we are required by the State Board of Accounts to track everything on a fund level. We go a step further and we're tracking it on the department level, the functional area level. And right now, there's no way in the state forms to be able to track the revenues on a department level. So those are things that we will implement internally to be able to have the divisions be able to look at their revenues that they're bringing in, as well as the expenses for those areas. But right now, if you're looking on the state site, everything is lumped together. Even public safety lit, there's one revenue line. There's not a police and then a fire. It's not, people don't typically look at that when they're looking at government information. And so we do want to track things on the level. So going back to your question, fund-based accounting, you have a beginning cash balance, you have what you received during that year in revenues, and then you have what you dispersed that year in revenues to get you an ending cash balance. And then again, Cindy will go over this when she's talking about the forms and talk about how we budget an 18-month budget and things like that. But really, it's that fund balance does not go away. It's cash in the bank, just like your personal bank account. You would have your money, if you have two incomes, both those incomes go into an account, and then you spend out of the account however you want. And going by that scenario, the cash is still in the bank, whether or not you did that kitchen remodel. And so that's a way to look at it, that money is still there for that, in that fund, right? It's your bank account. And so the money is in that bank account allocated to that fund.
Thank you.
Tammy, to that point, how detailed are the funds? In other words, how much maneuvering is allowed within the fund versus when the funds have to be reallocated?
So I will talk about that in just a little bit. We have one more department, and then I will talk about some of the structural challenges that we have with the reorg, and talk about how we can best explain this to the average citizen so that they can understand the complexity that we are living in regard to some of the funds. So let's move on. If there are no more questions for Public Works, we'll move on. Oh, we got one more for Lance. We got Stormwater.
Yes, the small but mighty Stormwater Department. Currently, we have a staffing level of 2. We are maintaining our levels of programming in 2021. I do want to add one additional stormwater technician position to make this, bring the total staffing level to 3. What a lot of people don't realize is that for every new home permit building permit that's issued through the planning department, we also issue a stormwater. So we're managing, one person is processing upwards of 200 permits a year. The other big demand from our public is complaints and responding to inquiries from the public. And we get dozens, if not hundreds of those each year. And right now we have one person propped up by the assistant superintendent of that department to go out and serve our customers. And this involves walking in backyards, looking at problems, trying to guide them to solutions, and participating where we can. We've got a small department that's really overtaxed, and I want to add 1 employee for public services.
And I want to make a note on this because we touched on it a little bit earlier. So 59,000 is the proposed max salary that would be included in this budget proposal. And you can see under the personnel highlights that we have an additional 41,000 that is attributable to benefits. That is at the max, benefit of the family status for healthcare, and with the increases that are expected for health insurance and things like that. So that number may actually, when you're looking at the spend, may actually go down. And same with the Public Works Department and any other proposed employees, with the exception of ones that are just FICA related. But for this one, I wanted to make sure that you understand that this is the maximum that the position would increase the budget by, but it may be less than this amount. Okay, last area, we're going to talk about parks. Mindy?
Yeah, so Mindy Murdoch, intern superintendent. You might know me as park naturalist normally, but yeah, so last but hopefully never least is our parks department. So we are asking for 2.2 million, which is, I know you were asking about increases. So we are looking at right now about 245,000 increase from our current 2019 budget that does not include the encumbrances that we currently have. And really, the big one of that one is that nationally trends for park usage with this pandemic, they've been showing national trends of anywhere between 25 to 215% increase in park usage throughout the United States. It's definitely an essential for our current public health. And we don't feel, and projections that I've seen have not shown that usage to lower even post-pandemic, which we love to hear. We want to see people out in our parks. So really the budget for next year focuses in 2 areas. One is the development of our kind of the growing pains side of our parks, which would be the programming, the environmental education, the recreation, and the outreach that we've been doing, and actually seeing that expand. We are in the process of right now doing a recreation assessment plan with Pros Consulting that should be wrapping up here in November to really give us kind of a plan to base our growth off of. Up until now, programming has all involved coming out of the Zion Nature Center and myself as the only programming aspect to our department. So last year that was 230 programs and 11,000 people. So we definitely, we need to make sure that we can build that solid foundation to continue to grow forward. So you can see there that we currently have a vacant administrative assistant position, and we're actually looking at taking the funding for that position, not removing the position, but just for next year, not focusing on filling it, and putting that towards a director of rec services that could make sure that as this section of the department grows, that it grows with a good structure to it. What you don't also see in there in that 245,000 increase is also an increase of about 30,000 on our part-time money, and that would be used towards hiring part-time naturalists as well as recreation programmers to again help grow that arm of our department. The hope is that as we grow that department, we're kind of building that solid foundation. And then, of course, a lot of those programmings are going to allow for revenue to come in. And another thing we'll really look at is actually looking at cost recovery for those programs. So once we build that section, hoping to make it so that it's something that's sustainable and will actually then benefit the parks overall with that increase in revenue potential. The other area that you can see there, of course, are capital highlights. We all know with 500 acres of green space, really the budget is focusing on maintaining that current green space. I hate to say that, but it's not just having parks, but making sure that we have quality parks and quality facilities to offer to the community. And that's sadly one area that we've seen some deferred maintenance on, and we want to make sure that we address those issues and get it back up to the level that we would like to see throughout the department. So some of those projects are, Tammy had talked about with encumbrances. There are some projects that are in our 2021 budget that we had hoped. I still am trying to remain optimistic that we will get those completed this year. But with the department transitioning with superintendent, as well as running into some issues in getting permitting through DNR, and even just finding contractors that have the ability to work projects into their schedule. We found a lot of contractors, because again, we're kind of working with things that are a little more specialized. They just don't have the time in 2020 that they're backed up with work that they're doing. So like I said, we've had to move some of those projects to looking at next year, just because we do not feel that they're going to get completed by the end of this year. Also in that capital cost is the proposal for finishing phase 2 of Heritage Trail Park. I'm sure you've seen in the news with the addition of the dog park there at Heritage Trail. So phase 2 would be finishing up the parking lot and playground areas for that park. So that park would be entirely done. And then as well as bringing Holiday Nature Park on to use for the public. So that would be a new park that would be then added for our community. So those are kind of where the capital costs fall in.
Tammy, this is Alex Choi. Does this include the cost for Overly Warman as well?
Mindy?
No. So Overly Warman as
Mindy.
Yeah, that's okay. Tammy could answer too. But no, Overly Warman Park is covered through the bond issue. So none of the funds in here that you see would go towards Overly Warman currently. We're hoping we will stay within the budget that we have set, and it looks like we will, as well as should for majority of the work with the Big 4 rail trail would also be covered under the bond that was passed last year as well. So those costs are not included in any of this.
Tammy, does it matter if a expense is capitalized or operationalized from a budgetary standpoint? Mindy mentioned deferred maintenance as being some of the capital requests, which in my mind might be more OpEx in nature. Does it really matter?
Usually the departments would look at their budget as a whole and they would manage it within that total budget. From the State Board of Accounts standpoint, they do look at those 4 categories. So the personnel, supplies, operating, and capital. And so we try to strive and put the budgets and the actuals to the specific areas where they are actually intended to be. So some of the intricacies, it's a fine line, right? Even with some construction projects, if there's engineering services, but it's for a capital project. And so basically wherever that line item was budgeted out of using the guidelines, and sometimes it depends on whether you're using a contractor or doing work in-house, whether something is a supply versus a contractual services, for example. So it does vary, and some of the items that you might have anticipated doing in-house, you might have had to contract out, for example. So again, we guide the departments to look at where the items were budgeted, but to post the expenses to where they actually are. And so when we're looking at actual information per year, we're seeing where that money was actually spent. So even if they had something budgeted in one line item, we want the expense not posted to match up to the budget line, but to get posted to where it actually got spent out of. So there is a little bit of an art to posting deferred maintenance, and I would have to look to see which line item that would be in. But some contractors, if you contract with someone, then is that a contractual services, or because you're contracting them to do a capital project, then is it capital? So, yeah.
And is they're posted as they're expensed actually? If there is a misalignment between the budget and the actual, is that when it, and this is just for education purposes, this when it comes to council then to say it was budgeted as capital, it now needs to be operating, we need to move that money over to support that? And is that done after the fact or before the fact?
So that is council preference. In other municipalities, it's typically done at the end of the year. Again, having the departments work within the budget. If council decides that they want to see all of the changes, then we would, you know, have to prepare those and go through the process of getting those on the agenda and, you know, all of that process. So you can decide if you want to see those quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. At this point, I'm getting familiar with all the line items and the budget and looking at the expenses. And if there are any adjustments that need to be made, maybe something was misposted, right? So then our office would be able to do an adjustment to get that expense to where it actually belongs. But that's why it's important to look at that budget versus actual, especially at our level, to be able to make sure that things were posted again where they belong. And then for this budget year for 2020, I am proposing that we do those transfers at the end of the year. Council can just pass a resolution that says that, you know, my office can make those transfers between categories in order to make it balanced for the end of the year. Again, if you want more information, notification, any of that, then we can definitely do a different process and get that on the calendar. Again, we want to work to get these capital plans and the sustainability plan. So I don't know how much we want to focus on, you know, this line was over by $5, this one was under by $5, we're going to transfer this $5 from this line to this line. If you want to set a threshold of a certain dollar amount, if one category is over by a certain dollar amount, we can definitely do that. And to kind of set that materiality threshold, either by a percentage or by a dollar amount. I'm open to all of those options.
Yeah, I'm not, and we'll talk about this offline. I'm not worried about trying to add a process for little things. I would want visibility if things are truly changing from what's been approved from the budget, to know that beforehand rather than just sort of trying to do it all at once at the end, in which case it's already happened and there's little recourse anyways.
So you're talking about like strategy changes. So if you were planning on doing a service in-house, but then you hired for it, for example, then that is a change of strategy, or would you consider that? And again, we can talk offline, but.
Yeah, and I don't know, right? Again, I'm not trying to be a hindrance, but I also want to make sure that it's the spirit of the budget is being followed for whatever it is, council initiatives inclusive.
Absolutely. And having budget to actual in a format where you guys will, the council will receive monthly, and that you will be able to ask those questions at that time while looking at that, hopefully in a platform that you will be able to, you know, slice and dice on fund, department, object, and across funds and do all of that, then I think that's where we need to be, and what my office will focus on getting to, so that you will always be aware and be able to ask questions, because you'll be seeing the information more often than once a year or twice a year, or however, or whenever you ask for it, right? We want that to be at your fingertips.
Yeah, no, agreed. That will be a tremendous benefit to us as well. So thank you for that.
So now we are going to go on and talk about the Gateway Finance Portal. So this is Cindy Poor with my office. She's my chief deputy and has done a great job and helped me out on the budget and getting up to speed on how things were done before and how to improve things going forward. So without further ado, Cindy.
Good morning. I'm going to try to share my screen here, so we'll see if I can take over for a second. Oh, you're going to have to unshare first. Can everybody see the screen up here? No, it may not work. You may have to do it since I have to go through a couple of different ways. Oh, crap. Just talk about it. All right. So the first thing that we're going to go into is the public access portion of Gateway. This is what, if you're wanting to go in to see what Zionsville's budget is, or one of the departments, or any of the various information for Zionsville, you can go into Gateway Indiana or Indiana Gateway. And this is what you would the page you would come up to, which is the home page. Go to search for reports, budgets, and then here it shows you all of the budget forms, and these are the same forms that we populate on our side when we're putting the information for the budget. I know Gateway came out probably about 10 years ago approximately, and initially came out just as a budgeting tool, but now it holds pretty much everything. So you've got your different forms. Probably one of the most common forms that people like to look at is the Form 1, which is the line item budget. You'll get to go in, choose your information. And we'll just spend a short amount of time here so I can show you what our process looks like. So this is what the Form 1 looks like for the cumulative fire fund for 2020. So you're going to have your line items, your categories, what was published for this budget, and then what was adopted. So you can pull up each one of the departments, the various funds. So this will give you, once we get everything into Gateway, then that'll end up populating over here once everything has been adopted. The current year financial worksheet, this is what we use when you guys were asking questions about the cash balances and what we've spent so far, and how do we know what we have left in our cash balance. This is the first worksheet that we do during the budget process. And like Tammy said, we budget on an 18-month cycle. So all the numbers are pulled as of June 30th. We have to estimate the ending year, the last 6 months of 2020, and then for the full 2021 year. So we're always budgeting on an 18-month basis. So what we do is on this worksheet, we go through, we've got our current year budget in there, if there were any encumbrances, any additional appropriations, and then we get line item 5, which is the total approved appropriations. Then we add in our disbursements. Are we anticipating any more additionals through the last 6 months of the year? And if we are, we would put that amount in line 10. So then as the form goes down, it's going to calculate in line 15 what your approximate ending balance for that fund will be. Oh, that's the June 30th, sorry. Yeah, so it's going to give you the total cash balance with the investments and everything included. Yeah, if you could, can you go over to our view? Okay. So the form 4B is probably one of the most important forms. This is where for the fund, it's going to show the net assessed value for that fund. It's going to show you the current budget amount. It's going to break down everything. First 6 months numbers, the estimation for the last 6 months of the year, additional appropriations, your cash balance. It takes into consideration your miscellaneous revenues on line 8. So it goes through the entire calculation of your revenues, your miscellaneous revenues, your cash balance, your budget, your disbursements. And then on line 16, it's showing you the amount that you will raise, the levy amount. And then on line 17, it shows you what that tax rate calculates out to. So when we're going through our process, as we complete the Form 1s for each fund and all the line items and so forth, those numbers will automatically populate over into the 4B. So that way, once we get everything in there that we have, asked for or what we've published, it'll give us an idea of what that rate would be. How much do we need to cut back? Do we need to cut back anything to maintain a rate that we want to maintain? So everything that we do on the Form 1s rolls over into the 4B. And the thing that right now that is really important that we don't have for the current or the 2021 budget is our certified net assessed value. Usually we will take the prior year's certified net assessed value and use like 80%, and 85%. Kind of a conservative number for our net assessed value until we actually get the certified numbers, and then we can plug that in there. With the Form 4B, like I said, this is going to show you all the breakdown of your cash and your revenues, your disbursements, and then calculate all of that into what your levy amount will be and your net tax rate. So did you want to go over into our side at all, or are you just going to stay here? Okay. So usually what'll happen is, can you go scroll to the top, please? A little bit, thank you. So it's going to show you what was published here in this second column. And then it's going to show you the certified amount of what was end up being, well, the appropriating body is what the council approves. And then the certified amount is what the DLGF approves. So it's just kind of a high level overview of what we complete on our end. We complete, the current financial worksheets that she showed you first. We complete a worksheet on all the debt service. On the online portion that we do, it compared to, with everything that we plug into the forms, Form 1s, et cetera, pulls that over to the is it the what form is it? Anyway, to the publication, which, we no longer have to put those in the paper, which is nice. So you don't have to worry about those timeframes. We just have to publicize our meetings and totals in Gateway now. like Tammy said, those have to be publicized at least 10 days prior to the public meeting. So whenever we decide on when that meeting will happen, we will get everything in there. As she also said before, is that we usually kind of have a 5% increase on our budget numbers, just for the fact that we can always approve less. We just can't go over what was published. So we try to give ourselves just a little bit of cushion so that when everything comes to you guys, if you see that you want to, put something in a fund or take something out, whatever, we can go lower, we just can't go higher. So we try to give you a little bit of cushion on that.
And you can see this represented last year when 5.3 million was published, and then there was a one line item in the Form 1, if you look at the forms, under other capital outlays, or the 5% of the budget. And so then when it comes time to adopt, you would adopt the actual expenditures, not the inflated number. And then, as you can see, the state comes back and says, due to the amount of taxes that you can raise or for whatever reason, you could only have a budget of this 5 million. So that is, again, we're going to publish high. Our net assessed value we don't have yet, but we would discount that anyway. And then that's what's driving the tax rates down at the bottom and the amount to be raised. So again, these will be much higher than what we are anticipating, but we need to do that because that's just part of the process of what we have to deal with the state. So I am going to flip just really quickly. I know we're out of time.
Hey, Tammy, real quick on that line.
Go down to talk about the service areas and taxing units, and then we will provide this online so that you can look at it in detail at a later date. But due to the reorg, there are multiple taxing districts, and there are 7 of them, as you can see on this list. And so some of the funds are all taxing districts. Oh, sorry, hold on. And let me flip back to. Okay. So there are multiple service areas, and as you can see, there are 7 districts that are split apart, and I'll show you graphical representations of these. But there's all taxing units. Some of the funds are just Zionsville corporate and the urban districts. Some are just Union rural and Union urban. Some are all taxing units except for Perry, and some are Zionsville corporate. So each of the funds associated will have a different net assessed value certified, which are the numbers that we're still waiting on, because the tax rate times the assessed value is what gives you your tax levy, the amount that you're able to collect in property taxes minus circuit breakers, tax caps, which I'm not going to get into today, but we don't collect all that they say that we're going to collect. So talking about all taxing districts. So currently the 2020 budget has the general, fire, parks, bond number 2, which is the 2018 GO bonds, cumulative capital improvement, and cumulative capital development funds. So everyone in all of these districts have on that Form 4B, whatever that certified amount was, then all of these are paying that rate. In 2021, the one change that we would make is to put the fire as a department under general and parks as a department under general. As we mentioned before, administration was lumped together, but for 2021, these are the functional areas that you would expect to see under the general fund having Form 1 detail for each of these areas in that general fund. So even though on the fund level, you're not going to see a fire fund and a parks fund, you will still see the same information that you did before on the expenses, with fire and parks being represented under the general fund because they are included in these service areas. They serve the same population of the town of Zionsville's reach. So here's a graphical representation. And you can go back one slide. There's a legend. And so that legend includes the yellow color is the urban service districts as well as the Zionsville Corporation. So there's 2 urban service districts, and I'll show that on a separate slide. But otherwise, this is the new Zionsville Corp. The green is the rural service districts, and it's broken up. You can see that there is a Union Township and there is a Perry Township component of the rural service districts.
Tammy,
so again, going back to these funds.
Tammy,
Did it?
Tammy,
Can you hear me, Tammy?
can you hear Josh?
Tammy, can
You're
you hear
not
me?
coming through, Josh. We're not hearing you.
I can
Okay,
hear
go ahead.
Josh.
Okay, there we go.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so if you think about the 2020 funds and 2021 funds and fire and parks moving over to a general fund, does that mean that as fire has a budget or as parks has a budget, that if there's a determination mid-year that the parks budget should be cut in half and it should all go to finance and records, that that's just something that's done with a stroke of a pen? Or are they still stay within the idea that there was a parks budget of $2 million and it will stay as a parks budget of $2 million?
Right. So the parks budget is a fund, and the parks is a little bit different because it has a parks board. So in Gateway, you will actually see
That's true. That's fair. That's fair.
Parks Department, and then it will say Parks Board. So the Parks Board is the one that's going to be approving the claims.
Yes.
Fiscal body council approves the budget just like you would. And it doesn't matter if you're approving it in the general fund or separate fund. The council is the fiscal body for all of these areas, right? It's just more visibility underneath it. Good question.
Okay. Thanks.
What about existing cash balances?
Yes, so in the forms, you will see an expenditure line item for the cash balance estimated. We will have a resolution prepared for council that would move that cash balance from the current fire fund and parks fund into the general fund. So that way it cleans up, again, the taxing districts. Yep, that's right. It cleans up the taxing districts, and again, trying to get to transparency and able to explain it to the public, because all of those funds serve that same population and they serve the town. Just, I mean, you have a parks department, you have a communications department, then they're all serving the same population. So just trying to streamline on some of that while giving, again, more visibility and not having the ability on the state side to be able to say that this revenue is a parks revenue or this revenue is a fire revenue, because all of those funds were already previously supported by the local income tax and by property taxes. And that does not change here, right? It's just, again, the allocation. So we don't want to have this shell game and having council focus on this, you know, we allocated 61% this year and now we're allocating 58%. So just trying to make it more transparent, more understandable for the public going forward.
It also gives it's a lot more flexible. So, you know, like she said, instead of having, you know, to do a percentage of the property tax here, percentage of the property tax in a different area, putting the ones that serve the, you know, all the taxing different districts under general allows a lot more flexibility with those dollars.
Right, but let's say, I'm just trying to understand. So if we have, let's say, a capital improvement that the fire department has been essentially saving up for, and it's been a strategic thing over years. So now we're gonna move those balances. That would just go into the general fund, and would that
Absolutely, and that's
gone?
the capital fund, because every year you have the opportunity to shift lit. So say in 2021, we say no lit's going to go into parks this year. You're doing the same thing. You're shifting that dollar amount, but overall, you're still accomplishing the same goal of you're funding the parks department, you're funding the communications department, you're funding all of these with lit and with property taxes. And so whether you fund it one year and don't fund it the next year and things like that, all of those have needs, and the council is still making the decision on how much to appropriate per year.
That's also where the sustainability plan will come into play, because, you know, even though they may have been savings for something and that's going into the general fund now, those dollars will still be set aside for that project. And when we have the sustainability plan, it'll be written into the plan, the capital items that they're wanting to do in those specific years, and how much of the general fund do we need to apply to that, and so forth. So it'll still be there. They're not losing.
That answered the question. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is perfect. This is what the workshop is all about, so that you guys can ask the questions, and so that we can try to make it understandable, so that we all know that these are the expenses and the revenues. Again, it's this pool of dollars. And how we allocate it is not as important as what are you funding in that year, and do we have a plan to go forward and still maintain adequate cash balances in order to support both the capital needs as well as the operating going forward.
So will that sustainability plan be part of the budget when it's presented to us?
Yes, so for the 2022 budget, we would, in this budget workshop, as other communities do, present that sustainability as part of that budget workshop earlier next time. And so that we would be able to, you would be able to have that information when you're approving the 2022 budget, so that you can make sure that those things that you are voting on are sustainable, especially with personnel. So you mentioned, you know, if there was a need for public safety personnel, well, we don't want to hire a bunch of people and then not have the revenue in order to fund them in the next year. So we would definitely consider that going forward.
What about the 2021 budget?
So for the 2021 budget, I'm confident that we will have the revenues and we have adequate cash balances in order to fund these expenses going forward. During the budget year, if we find out something differently on the lit, say the lit revenue is going to decrease, we do have the ability to cut back our spending, so that we can direct the departments that, hey, that capital expense that you were planning on doing, let's hold off, and then we will not spend it in this year, and then we will budget for it possibly in the next year, right? So we have that ability to monitor and to maintain those and be able to look at that sustainability plan as we develop it and make sure that we have adequate funding and resources in order to meet it.
And as for 2021, it's we're kind of seeing, we'll have a better idea once we get the revenues and so forth. But the way it's looking right now, any decrease we may see in lit will be offset because of the possibly increased net assessed value. So we're not looking to see a huge hit in 2021. 2022 is probably where we'll see more of that, from especially on the income tax side.
So and based on what Cindy was just saying, we're expecting around 90% of our current year lit for the local income tax for 2021, but the estimates for 2022 are, you know, right now they're about 75 to 80% are the numbers that we're hearing as a possibility for a decrease in those revenues. So we can get through this year. Next year, 2022, we will have to take a hard look, and 2021 also, we will monitor and work with the departments on their levels of spend based on the new information that we get from the state.
Tammy?
Yes.
So as we're looking at shortfalls in the lit, do we have the ability then to make up for that with the rainy day fund?
So we would typically not, we would not recommend that, period. The rainy day fund is meant as that total safety net. Again, we have strong cash balances in the funds as it has been accumulating over the years. So I'm certain that we're not going to have to dip into that rainy day. We're not going to have to get a temporary loan. We do expect to get an increase in the property tax revenue that will help offset some of the local income tax revenue because of the net assessed value increase that we're expecting, as well as we can again raise our property tax levy, the amount that we collect, not necessarily the tax rate, but the amount that we collect by the 4.2%.
So Tim,
yeah, go ahead.
If I think about the four buckets you've talked about, personnel, supplies, operating capital, in this change, do each of these groups, administration, board of safety, things like that, do they each have those four buckets? Absolutely. Or are those four buckets just the general fund?
No, all funds have all of those buckets. So there are line items within those buckets. So for example, on personnel, you have salary, you have FICA Medicare, you have health insurance lines, you have the group term life, you've got workers' comp, and you've got retirement funds, and all of those are line item out on the Form 1s, and they roll up on the Form 4As, I think, or Form 4As, you'll see just those 4 major categories. But you do have you can see the line item where things were budgeted, and you'll be able to see a budget versus actual, hopefully going forward when we have a new system that we can get those to you in a readable format. Then you'll be able to see that on the line level. And we can also, the plan would be to be able to aggregate those as well and see a budget versus actual on those.
And since we're planning on going to more of a departmentalized chart of accounts next year, we can kind of give you a cheat sheet, because I know that we send you the appropriation reports, and I'm not sure if you're real familiar as far as how the breakdown of our appropriation numbers are, because it's a 9-digit number, and the first 3, that's the department, or I'm sorry, the fund. And then the middle 3 will designate the department. And then the last 3 are those categories: the personnel, the salary, the operating supplies, and so forth. So since we're going to a lot of having really using the departments, we can give you kind of a cheat sheet, so you'll know that, you know, this is the fire department in the general fund.
So Tammy, this is Tim.
Yes.
I have some information that is hot off the press.
Live breaking news.
It is breaking news, has not been released to DLGF's website yet, but will be by later today. The estimates are in for your local income tax for 2021. You will see from your 2020 regular distribution a decrease in certified shares of only $75,967.
That's so good.
And a decrease in your public safety of $62,504.
So that is much better than expected.
It is much. That's why I thought I would break in with late breaking news here. I just got this from Fred Van Dorp at the budget director at DLGF. You will all remember, though, that this year you did receive a supplemental lit distribution in May of almost 1.6 million combined, 1 million for certified shares and about 570,000 for public safety. So when you take into account that, there is a reduction, but from your normal distribution, there is a very little change for next year planned. These are estimates. They will not be finalized till the end of the month, but we typically do not see much of a change from the original estimate to the final certification.
Great. Thank you for that great information, Tim.
I just literally just got the email. So
thanks, Tim. So Tammy,
yes.
What is the supplemental lit?
Yeah,
why did we receive that, and what was it used for?
So I believe, Tim, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that is not normally a budgeted item. So we do not count on that revenue. And as I was saying before, when we look at the rainy day fund and we look to possibly increase it, the supplemental revenue that we were not expecting is the first place that we would typically look to in order to say that, yes, we are totally confident that we can move this money into the rainy day fund and not have an impact on operations. And so that would be my recommendation. We would follow the statutory rules for transferring from general into the rainy day fund. But that 1.6 million, that's where I anticipate that going. And then the supplemental distribution, to answer your question on that. So every year the districts are allowed an amount for the local income tax. And it is not based on who lives in the district and pays that money into it. It is based on an antiquated formula that, not going to go into that right now, but anyway, there's a formula that distributes it to the county, and then the county then distributes it to the taxing units. And so they certify that amount, but then there's also a rule on the cash balances that the counties are required to maintain. And so they set a rule that if it was over a certain amount, then they had to then distribute that to the entities. And then the entities would then get that distribution so that they're not holding more money than is necessary. And Tim, you can jump in if or expand on that, but
you're right on.
so that's what the supplemental is. So it is lit that was not certified during the budget process, but that they later reviewed their cash balances and then determined that they, in order to meet the rule, that they would have to then distribute this additional amount. So it is not guaranteed. I want to say maybe it's been done 3 or 4 times before in the past. Over years, it's just once a year if we do receive it. So we never count on it because the legislature, as with any of the budgeting things, can change from year to year. And so that's why we underestimate our revenues, overestimate our expenses, and so that we can know that we are confident in our budget process and our budget numbers presenting to you.
And just quickly, she was talking about transferring money over to rainy day. There's state statute that says, and I think it just changed a couple years ago too, but we're allowed to move up to 10% of our approved budget from general over to rainy day, and that's just done as a resolution. And so that gives us the ability, because rainy day is only funded if we put something in there. It does not have regular funding to it. So with that statute, you know, and I know Tammy and I both agree on this, that you know, even if you don't have the 10%, if your cash balances are strong, that you need to move something over there every year and just let that build.
And also on the rainy day, as far as what it can be used for, I've seen other municipalities budget $250,000 in the event of a natural disaster. So if a natural disaster were to happen in Zionsville, we still need to get payroll going. We might have other expenses, contractor and things, so that we wouldn't, Josh, to your point, have to come back to council and say, hey, I need an appropriation because we need, you know, $100,000 of tree service or dumpster service, flood, whatever the natural disaster is. And so that we could have access to that appropriation in the sustainability plan, we could then go back and say that this is not intended to be spent. So you wouldn't see that expense, you know, there'd be a footnote on that it was approved as a budget item, but we are not planning on spending it.
So Tammy, based on Tim's news and
yes,
my perception of your and the mayor's reaction, which sounds like good news, yes, what, if any, does this impact what was just proposed? I mean, do we now have more money that we thought we didn't have that may go towards services? Is just going to be saved for later? Can you sort of clue me or council into, it's sort of neat to see it real time, but what does this really mean pragmatically?
Sure. So we were anticipating a shortfall of a few $1 million, honestly, of potential that we could have had with that lit distribution, right? Now, this does not change 2022, and we have no idea how long the COVID will last. So maybe that goes into, well, it will go into 2023. Does it go into 2024, right? So this would hedge us on being able to prepare for the future of decreased revenues, because we know that we're going to get a hit in 2022. We know it, like there's no question, because people are out of work right now. And so that then sets us up for a good 2022 budget without having to make significant cuts in our proposed budgets going forward. So to answer Troy's question, that yes, we do feel that we are proposing a sustainable budget for 2021 without having that sustainability plan, but going forward, that will become even more important to have that plan, especially as we deal with the impacts of today that will impact our local income tax distributions in 2022 and beyond. So I have a, ooh, wow. I have
I'm looking at the numbers. A lot of other communities are not as fortunate with their 2021 estimates.
So we might want to then make sure that that was not an error. So again, we are going to not build in, we're going to build in more than just this reduction that Tim spoke about. We will make sure that it's conservative enough to account for any you know, changes in the certified number. And then let me go through just a few more slides, and then we can talk offline about next steps and then get that information out to all the council members and get that set on the schedule. So we talked about all the taxing districts and the funds that are affected in those, and then the map showing those areas. So now we go into some of the other funds that are not the total area. So you've got 3 funds: Local Road and Street, MVH, and Police, that are Zionsville Corporation, Eagle Zionsville Urban District, and Union Zionsville Urban District. So again, with the reorg, this was actually from the reorg document from one of the amendments, and this shows the yellow is the Zionsville Corporation. And then if you recall from the slide right here, Union Township is at the top and then Perry is down at the bottom. So this is the Union Zionsville Urban District, and then down here is the Eagle Zionsville Urban Service District. So, and when we're looking at it as a whole, that now becomes what we would typically count as Zionsville Corporation, so going forward. But for these purposes, it is broken out for the taxing units. So that means that if you live in this area, the Union Zionsville Urban District, then you are paying a rate, but over here in the green, you are not paying into the Local Road and Street, MVH, or Police funds. So when you get your tax bill, it will not have these 3 taxing units will not have a rate for MVH or Police. There is no rate for Local Road and Street. So the assessed value times the MVH tax rate and that levy amount only applies to these 3 districts. And then we look at the fire building debt for Station 82, and this is Union, both the rural and the urban districts. So this was based on, at the time the debt was levied, it applied only to Union Township. So on here, again, this one right here, the yellow in the Union, has the same rate as Union, but all those other tax rates are not paying into the Station 92 debt. So the good news is that this rolls off, so we don't have to explain that later on, because the last payment is in December of 2025. Again, going back to that sustainability plan, we will take that into account, that debt is rolling off, and we will look towards the future. So then there's all taxing units except for Perry. So again, depending on when the certain rates in the service area at the time. So this is all taxing units except for Perry. So, you know, Perry was over there on the left-hand side. And so the cumulative fire special then covers this area, but not Perry. So the Perry does not pay into the rate for the cumulative fire special. And then we have the Zionsville corporate, which is just the yellow now, and not the newer areas. And that is the Park District bond of 2007. And this one's last payment is December of 2021. So that's the kind of breakdown and what I had to wrap my head around when I'm looking at these funds and trying to streamline and be able to explain it to the public and want to say, you know, how do we go here and do all of these things. One last piece, and I won't go into all of it today, but there is a tax bill calculator. And again, our goal would be flat or declining town tax rate, which I think we can achieve easily with the net assessed value increase. And even though we're adding additional services and levels of service for new programs and projects, we still want to make sure that we're conscientious of the town taxpayers. And so we will ask, you know, we will propose a budget. It won't be advertised as a flat or declining, but we can make that what we are striving for. But there is a taxpayer tax bill estimator, and you can go and select the county and then the tax district. And again, there's those 7 different tax districts. So depending on which tax district you are in, if you have a home value, you will have a different tax bill in each of those areas. And so I want to make sure that I communicate that, because if you have constituents asking you questions about certain things and why maybe their neighbor across the street has a different tax bill and has the same house value, then this is a tool that is on the public side that they can go to and be able to estimate their tax bill. So I just, I want to do part of the education and whatnot for both the council and the public on where these resources are and how the taxpayer can then get the information. So in addition to our website, the additional information is posted on Gateway, and it is public information.
Tammy, when you were showing that map that had the yellow and the brown areas there, those brown areas, if I remember right, look like areas that council had migrated from the rural service district to the urban service district. But are they separate in any way, shape, or form from the ones in the yellow?
So as far as service area, when they are combined with, when we're looking at the services that the Public Works Department, the Streets Department provides for local registry, MVH, and for police services, then it is treated no differently. So our revenue stream for these funds come from these taxpayers only for the property taxes, right? And so they are getting the same level of service whether you're in the brown or the yellow.
But why are they brown?
So that is just telling you that that is called the Eagle Urban Service District, are these ones. And so for taxing purposes, like I showed on this last slide, that on this taxing district, they're going to select the urban districts. So there'll be a number and a taxing district, and they would select that, because if you look at this slide, Zionsville Corporate, they were not included when the Park District bonds of 2007 were implemented.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So that's what the difference is.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. And so at this time, I will open up for any other questions. I know we're short on time, over time, and you guys have my contact information and are welcome to reach out to me with any questions, and I'll be happy to get you more information. And we will go forward and present additional information all throughout this process, and hopefully get it to you in a way that is understandable to the general public as well as the council.
Tammy, one question from me about, and I should have asked this back in the police report, departmental report. So last year, before I was on council, there was conversation about a new building being proposed to house police in a separate area away from what would now be proposed as DPW. And we were talking about bonding, and that failed. So was there thought about saving for that? That was part of the conversation, or are we still looking at a new building at some point and bonding for that?
So we will look at doing plans. Again, we don't want to jump into anything, but there are some remodel dollars and things like that included in the budget that have been included in past budgets as well. So those will be, we will look at both existing appropriations for remodeling information and have plan dollars also included in the budget to look for some strategic opportunities in order to meet the goals and to get everyone in the right place.
Okay, thank you. And then President Garrett, when will we be making decisions on dates, finalizing dates and things like that?
That I don't know, Councilor Choi, but it'll certainly be a priority. We'll get it figured out ASAP.
Okay, thank you.
I do not have anything else for this presentation.
Appreciate it, Tammy. I know it's a lot of detail. It takes time to put this stuff together, so thank you. And all the department heads, but appreciate you coordinating.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Craig Melton, real quick, where are these slides going to be available to us?
They will be posted on the agenda for this meeting. I will have them added. So when someone goes to look at this information, that they would be able to see this slide deck. It can be posted today.
Will it also have, Tammy, just a total budget number? That's one thing I'm trying to keep track of, just some items and different department totals, but I didn't see a total number. And I know that there were some areas that we've historically funded that were not included in this presentation also. Is there a total number that we have?
So those will be presented at the next presentation. We are still working through all of the line items. For example, we talked about that 5% increase in the advertised rate. So if we're looking at, advertised 2020 to advertised 2021, looking at how we account for encumbrances, whether or not to include those. So again, working on the comparison side by side, we want to give you an accurate picture that will give you information in order to make informed decisions off of. So we do not have just that summarized information at this time, as we're still working through, as Cindy showed you, all those budget forms that we're filling out with the revenues. As we get them in, we're updating those. The property tax levies are based on the assessed values, which we do not have right now. And so we are working on that, and that will be forthcoming.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send you an email about it. I'd just like to know what the balances of. Historically, we would see these budget presentations as this is how much money we proposed last year. Here's what we spent or didn't spend or we're planning not to spend. So here's our surplus. Here's what the new budget is. And even before we got all those numbers, we at least had a total number of what the anticipated ask would have been from the towns. So I'd just like to get as much of that information as possible before we have to make a decision on this.
Correct. And like I said, there's a month between now and the adoption consideration. So we will make sure that the advertised and the proposed budget includes enough appropriation in order to meet everyone's needs and in order to fund the budgets. And then the council will make the decisions on if there are areas that they would like to move around or to decrease or increase. So we'll be able to make those accommodations through this budget process.
That sounds like it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks.
You too.